CASA, I, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, welcome you all to this webinar on the subject, Galwan, where do India and China stand 1 year on? At the very outset, I request all of you to join me in observing 1 minute silence in memory of our brave soldiers who laid down their lives at Galwan fighting the Chinese in a deadly hand-to-hand battle on this very day last year. Silence, please. Thank you. 15 June 2020 is a red letter day in the annals of India-China relationship, not in a happy sense as the term normally denotes, but in a tragic sense, as it will always remind Indians of a betrayal, a literal stab in the back, while we are grappling with the deleterious effects of the Wuhan virus that was spreading rapidly across the country. This perfidy of epic proportions took place as the Chinese pounced upon the unsuspecting Colonel Santosh Babu and his men, and using primitive but lethal weapons killed 20 of them and injured many others. This was a denouement of decades of a slow build-up of trust between the two countries, albeit with hiccups, culminating with the Prime Minister of India himself expending a lot of political capital in trying to build a personal rapport with China's strongman President Xi over 6 years from 2014 to 2020. With the brutal killing of our unsuspecting troops by the PLA, the trust simply evaporated and Galwan entered a lexicon as a word that will always denote betrayal. To speak on what this has resulted in, where do India and China stand 1 year on the trust deficit, on whether we have achieved some sort of strategic clarity, and how we should view the future of this relationship, we have with us an eminent panel to share their views. Although they do not need an introduction, I shall say a few words briefly about them. The first speaker is Mrs. Nirupama Menon Rao. She has had a 4-decade-long diplomatic career during which she has held several important assignments. She was India's first woman High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, the first Indian woman ambassador to the People's Republic of China, and she also served as India's Foreign Secretary from 2009 to 2011. At the end of the term, she was appointed India's ambassador to the United States, where she served for a term of 2 years from 2011 to 2013. The other panelist is Lieutenant General Prakash Menon, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, who is the director of the Strategic Studies Program in the Takshashila Institution. He is also Professor Emeritus at the Transdisciplinary University, Bangalore, and an adjunct professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. Commissioned in 1972, General Menon has extensive operational experience in commanding counterinsurgency operations in Central, North, and South Kashmir. He was a Major General Staff of the Army's Northern Command responsible for operations in J&K and the Commandant of the National Defense College, New Delhi. After his retirement in 2011, he continued in government as a military advisor and secretary to Government of India, and from 2015 as officer on special duty in the National Security Council Secretariat. He has a PhD from Madras University for his thesis, Limited War and Nuclear Deterrence in the Indo-Pak context, and has authored the marvelous book, The Strategy Trap, India and Pakistan Under a Nuclear Shadow. Post-retirement, he continues to teach and research with a special focus on the role of force in statecraft. Welcome to you, sir. Our moderator for today's discussion is Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, PVSM, AVSM, SM, who superannuated after 40 years of distinguished service in the Army as Director General Military Operations. He commanded a corps in the East with his divisions facing China. He writes and speaks regularly on wide-ranging subjects especially on matters strategic and military. He was also the co-chair of the India-US Executive Steering Group on Defense Cooperation and was also, till very recently, the director of the Center for Joint Warfare Studies. He has spoken and written extensively on China and has closely been following the developments in Ladakh. So let us commence the webinar. All attendees are requested to type in the question into the chat box, and they'll be picked up from there by the moderator and our team. Without further ado, I now hand over to our moderator, General Bhatia, to carry on with the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Jayan, and thank you, General Gautamurthy. Thank you, Team CASA, for this very interesting construct of an year on Galwan. We have two leading strategic experts of the country who know China better than most others that I have seen. Hence, I have no intention of standing between the participants who bring in their own experiences, their own perspectives, and are two leading experts. However, just to give a few points, 2020 has been a defining year. While the world and India was battling the made in China coronavirus or the COVID-19, India supporting the world with the medicines, we saw China shatter a 4.5-decade old equilibrium, peace and tranquility along the line of actual control with the forward deployment, basically Eastern Ladakh. Now, the key question remains, what is China's strategic intent? That is something which we'll have to really look at. We've been looking at over the last 1 year. We have come out with many intentions and many aims. But I think this is the right forum to crystallize as to what the strategic intent of China was in shattering a very fragile peace and tranquility along the line of actual control. China, of course, followed the Sun Tzu's strategy. Amidst chaos, there's an opportunity. And when the world was battling the pandemic, they saw this opportunity and they came and did this forward deployment Eastern Ladakh. And this happened after, let me put in context, after the second informal meeting in October in Mahabalipuram between the two world leaders, the two strong leaders, Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, and President Xi Jinping. So it was October 2019 that we had the meeting with the two powerful leaders, and this was consolidating the first summit. So the India-China relations growth trajectory. The two leaders, very powerful leaders again, they had met 18 times in about 5 years, which is about every 3.5 months. So that was where I think we were taken in by strategic surprise by the intent of China. Something which we'll need to clarify. Why did they, peace and based on 5 principles and 5 agreements, and China goes in and destroys everything that was going on. Most of us commonly believe that it is because of the road, the DBO Shiok road, which was in the making, which was commissioned 2019. I, for one, don't even think about it because that's a very tactical thing, and China is looking at strategic gains and not any tactical gains. So I request the panelists today to comment on India's China challenge and also China's India challenge. What are China's anxieties? What are China's concerns? Why is China's doing what it is doing? Why? The why of it, not the what of it. The what of it is known to most of us. What are its sensitivities? So that will have to be seen to get a way forward for India in all its domains, be it diplomatic, informational, military, economic domains. How do we bridge the asymmetry? China's CNP is 5.5 times that of India. China's economy is at about 14 trillion and we are at about 2.9 trillion. That's again about nearly 5 times. So how do we build that estimate? How do we build those, not build, we narrow the gaps between them? So these are some of the questions. We had a good strategy along the line of actual control. The armed forces have done reasonably well. The diplomatic channels have worked. We have followed the strategy of no blinking, no brinkmanship. Xi Jinping, I think, has changed a number of things. He took over as supreme leader in March of 2014, March 2013. And within a month, we had the Dipsang intrusion on 14th April, which lasted about 22 days. Thereafter, the September 2014 Chumar intrusions, and then 2017 Doklam happened. And I will quote Ambassador Rao in that during Doklam, she had written a very nice article, a paper, which says China's adversary, don't make it an enemy. I think that continues, and we'll have to see what they do. So A word about Galwan. Today is the first year of Galwan. Galwan was an inflection point. It's a turning point. It was a game changer. My personal assessment is, having known the PLA a little, that there were many more Galwans waiting to happen. This equipment which they used, the batons they used and the wires, the spikes they used, was not only issued to one particular subunit, they were issued a number of subunits and units. So there were a number of Galwans which were waiting to happen, which were planned, but Santosh Babu and his unit, their ferocious reaction, their retaliation, it's not a number game we're talking about. I'm not talking about a balance sheet that they had lost so many, but their retaliation took surprised the PLA, and that is something which we have to respect them and we owe it to them. And since the 15th or 16th of June, we have not seen any violent actions, activities, or events for the last 1 year. So that is owed to our strengths, demonstrated strength, displayed strength, and a will to stand and face up to China along with action control. I think I'll finish over there, and I will let Ambassador Rao. Ma'am, all yours. We await your comments. Will followed by General Prakash Menon, and then we'll take the question answers from the select gathering who are attending this, who are participating in this webinar. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Bhatia, and thank you to CASA for inviting me here today on what is a significant anniversary in India-China relations. It's the first anniversary of the Galwan tragedy, which happened on 15th June 2020 in Ladakh. General Bhatia said, I should perhaps put this relationship that we have with China in some context, and I would like to position it within the Indo-Pacific region. We all know how Galwan happened, or what the sequence of events was and what has happened since, and the efforts made for disengagement and de-escalation. So I would not go into that. In any case, General Prakash Menon is here, and General Bhatia, and all of you are here with whose military knowledge is far superior to mine. So I will talk mainly about the diplomatic and political dimensions of the situation we face. And I place it within the Indo-Pacific region. And we look at the position of China. China is surrounded by about 27 countries, and only 2 of those countries, Pakistan and Cambodia, are the friends of China. And the Chinese today have a rule by fear under Xi Jinping. It is an autocratic system marked by strong leadership, steady economic growth, although not as fast as in recent years, and the emphasis on stability. We are all agreed that China is overstepping and ambitious, and that there is no uncontested domain as far as China is concerned. China longs for foreign policy victories, which I would, in a sense, would draw your attention to the recent article in the Global Times, where they are calling for a symbiotic relationship between India and China. They obviously want us to hug and make up, which is not just going to happen. But this is what we see in today's China. We see this combination of hubris and insecurity, a combination of Chinese assertiveness and military strength, which is a dangerous mix, and also the development of system destruction warfare, about which all of you know much better than me, sophisticated electronic warfare, counter-space, cyber capabilities, and the C4 ISR capabilities that they have honed even further. So there's no uncontested domain, as I said, as far as China is concerned. And China has had foreign policy failures all around. 2,000 years of dealing with the world, I don't think there is even one foreign policy success that China can claim. Maybe the opening to the US in 1971, which has all come collapsing like a house of cards now, of course. So with Australia, it is practicing economic coercion today. With Japan, the Senkaku Islands continue to be a source of tension and potential conflict. With India, the territorial status quo has been changed. With Taiwan, there is maritime harassment and airspace intrusion. With Vietnam, fishing vessels are being rammed. Hong Kong, a new national security law has been imposed. All in all, China is a deeply conflicted rising power. At the same time, Chinese officials see today as a period of great opportunity for their country to pursue strategic ambitions in the region. Their wolf warriors are also a feature of their diplomacy today, very much like the keyboard warriors on social media, all in all reflecting the country's bloated sense of self. But we have to accept that as far as the region is concerned, China will have crucial influence, and it's a de facto empire trying to behave as a nation state. It feels its model is superior to other nations. It has this sense of righteousness. There's an extreme centralization of power. And as a Chinese friend of mine who lives in New York recently noted, it has Confucianism as an outer shell, legalism as an inner core, and an abiding heart of darkness at the center of the Chinese state. China's BRI is another source of tension between India and China, and China's BRI is often seen as China's Indo-Pacific with Chinese characteristics. Very perilous passages are being navigated in the Indo-Pacific, and even as we move to South Asia, today there is a second sun in the South Asian sky, as the analyst Raja Mohan noted recently. The first sun, of course, India being the largest country, but the second sun is China. And China sees this region as a secondary strategic direction, but very much a part of its Go West policy. And you know what the flagship BRI project is, the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And China is establishing offshore strategic pivots, key military logistics facilities, potentially military logistics facilities in many parts of the region. And as one Chinese analyst noted, the strategic importance of South Asia and the northern Indian Ocean to China is no less than it is for India. So you have the military geography of the BRI buttressing its geostrategic reach. In fact, the PLA's concerns about China's vulnerabilities on its eastern flank spurred the idea of the westward expansion. That is the foundational precept of the BRI. And today the BRI is no longer a shambolic initiative. It is very strategically central to Xi Jinping's personal brand, and its activity is more organized, and there are less white elephant projects, more emphasis on green technology, digital and health silk roads. So, and especially in the light of the pandemic and its aftermath, many smaller countries are intensifying their reliance on China for infrastructure financing. And therefore, we are at the crossroads today. And there is, you know, in the context of what you said, how we move forward, there is a problem about how India is to, in a sense, refashion its outreach to the region so that South Asia, which is, you know, the Indian subcontinent, 20 years ago when the book, The Tournament of Shadows, was published, its authors said how at the Khyber Pass, there was a big sign which says, "You are entering the Indian subcontinent." I don't know if that sign still exists, but certainly this region is supposed to be an integer. We cannot consider it as an arena, which has been the traditional bureaucratic approach to this. Of course, there are tensions in the region, and India, the tensions between India and Pakistan have prevented us from really conceptualizing an idea of South Asia and an idea of South Asian unity. And in the process, the links between China and Pakistan have grown much, much closer. And the political logic of China-Pakistan cooperation far outweighs the economic aspect of it, as you see from the CPEC, which somebody called a Potemkin village in a self-sustaining loop. So our vision for South Asia has also to change. We have to think in terms of greater integration, connectivity across many sectors, including between people, between the youth of the region, stressing open democratic values, respect for diversity, transparency, good governance. So these, are on our plate to deal with. But China's motivations are basically, it wants to establish economic dominance, curtail India's influence, and capitalize on its geo-economic position to wield leverage over these smaller countries. And it also resort to a carrot and sticks policy to advance national interest with all of the countries in South Asia, excepting India. And China's disregard for territorial sovereignty in our border region, and you come to Ladakh here, and also to CPEC, is a big bone of contention. Because in conventional international relations discourse, as somebody said recently, the Kashmir territorial dispute is between only two parties, India and Pakistan. But as CPEC runs through Kashmir, China also becomes involved. And the CPEC marks the emergence of China as Pakistan's principal external strategic partner, replacing the US, and also sees Kashmir's emergence as a land bridge between China and Pakistan, sharpening the geopolitical divide with India. With Nepal also, China's geopolitical ambitions are to connect Nepal to Tibet and exploit the trust deficit between Nepal and India. Strategic pivots in the region also include the ports of Gwadar and Hambantota. Many of our South Asian neighbors either hedge on this concept of relations with China, or they are balancing India and China against each other, or just plain and simple bandwagoning with China. South Asia is now becoming an arena for India-China competition, perhaps not in the real sense, because the Chinese seem to have taken full advantage of their geo-economic capacity to promote their interests in the region. Unfortunately, given the state of relations between China and India, we don't even have channels of communication with China on South Asia. And this also enables our neighbors to play the China card against us. All in all, I think, this is the background against which our relationship with China is being transacted today, together with our growing strategic convergence with the United States, which in a sense seems preordained given the state of relations between India and China and the post-violent confrontation between India and China in Galwan, which has further cemented these trends. Unfortunately, there's no question of antagonistic decoupling from China. It seems practically impossible, as the recent trade figures have shown. And given the extent of our linkages, economic and trade linkages with China, despite the fulsome political level intent to reduce economic dependence on China, it's not so easy as throwing television sets out of our windows. So at the moment, as another observer said, fighting, trading, talking might just become the conceptual arch shaping India's new relationship with China. What are the scenarios we can sketch? And not for me to be a fortune teller, but will the status quo persist in this highly unstable manner, or will there be a miracle of miracles, a grand territorial bargain and peaceful settlement of the dispute? Or thirdly, would there be a small border conflagration, triggering escalation into a wider military conflict, which would mean hot war between India and China? Against all this, there is this fundamental asymmetry between India and China. General Bhatia and others spoke about the difference in the GDPs of the two countries, the comprehensive national power and strength of the two countries. So right now, India is like that sumo wrestler, seeking not to be pushed back out of the ring, but things are difficult. We don't want a military conflagration on the border with China. We've put up a stiff defense, and all credit goes to our armed forces. We've reached out to strategic partners like the US and Japan. We've received very good logistical and intelligence support, and we've been less circumspect about the membership of the Quad. I think it's also a time to reflect on the reasons why this has happened vis-a-vis China. The model of relations that we built up after 1988, post Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China, where we talked of improvement of relations in all areas, while at the same time focusing on a peaceful and negotiated settlement of the boundary question. That model, that operating system has obviously crashed and burned in Galwan. And did we see this coming? Lots of people say we were surprised by the Chinese reactions or actions in Ladakh. But was there really cause for us to be surprised? I think from about 2008, 2009 onwards, from the time of the last financial crisis, we had seen this assertiveness of China, this kind of hubris, this kind of very, autistic behavior that the Chinese have. They've been tone deaf about the need for mutual sensitivities in the relationship. Their position on the staple visas in Arunachal Pradesh, their interventions and transgressions in Depsang, in Chumar, and in other parts of Ladakh. And then you had, when Article 370
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am, 2 minutes.
Yeah, they misread our decisions completely. They thought it was a muscular India's determination to recover lost territory. I think that was complete misreading. Today, the actions they took in Ladakh would suggest they believed strategic friendship with India is untenable. They wanted dominance on the border. They view relations through the lens of Xinjiang and Tibet. They were insecure about our infrastructure build-up, which is totally legitimate on our side of the line of actual control. So all in all, in China, there's no consensus in their strategic circles on fundamental aspects of India-China relations. And the post-1988 framework of relations has collapsed. And we can discuss what we need to do next in the discussion part of this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you so very much. We just so much of things to cover. You really covered almost everything which is there to cover other than the military aspects, and touched upon it. The three strategies: military question, wolf war diplomacy, debt trap, their interest in the Indo-Pacific region, the larger geopolitics, the China dream of BRI, CPS's centrality. I can go on and on. The strategic convergence you spoke about with the India and US fighting, trading, talking, the fundamental asymmetry. Thank you very much for everything. But we'll come back to you later during the question answers. And one of the things we'd like you to address is how does India deter China's aggressiveness? Because that is something which is playing on our minds. And there are extreme positions in this which we discuss from the military option to synergized option. But how do we actually what all do we do to deter China's aggressive behavior? So that would be a key question which we'll come back to later. General Prakash Menon, sir, or General Prakash Menon for your comments.
I think General Prakash Menon accidentally got signed out. So I'll try and call him and come back. Right.
So, Ambassador Rao, may I request you to dwell on a little bit on, what can we do to deter China's aggressive behavior in the meantime? You have covered some of it, but okay, General Menon is back.
Yeah.
So, welcome back.
Technology and internet. I missed the last portion, but I think so firstly, thank you, CASA, for this honor. And let me start with the fact that how did China use the Galwan incident recently? And how does it actually play between the Chinese Communist Party, headed by a very ambitious, most powerful authoritarian leader, Xi Jinping, and the other actors within China, especially the Chinese people, the Chinese military, and the Chinese Communist Party itself. So what they did recently, I think that was on the 10th of June, they had the regimental commander of the, who was a casualty of the Galwan incident, and he bore a big scar on his head, which was publicized by CCTV. And he spoke about the heroism of the men. He especially spoke about the heroism of the four who were supposed to have been killed. And then he said that the Chinese military is willing to sacrifice its lives to defend every inch of territory. That was the message which it wanted to send. Apparently, this is one Xi Jinping is orchestrating, and all this is organized by what the Public Works Department, which is under the Central Military Commission, which is the main arm of propaganda of the Chinese propaganda machinery itself. And of course, it also awarded to the commanding officer who was killed in action the title of Border Defending Hero, and also gave awards to other, what do you call, first class merits. Thirdly, as part of 1st of July celebrations, the centenary, 29 party members have been awarded, and one of them is a commanding officer who was actually killed. Of course, I'm just wondering, and I just leave it to the military men to decide, especially the people who know the stuff on the ground, what was a regimental commander doing there and getting hit by Indians and actually wearing a scar? And I would not be surprised if the scar actually had another history, or it was something which is meant for the camera, because that is how China operates. But it was a message. And at the same time, Xi Jinping, in a remarkable departure from the arrogance and aggressiveness which China has been displaying, said that we should make friends, be lovable, credible, and a respectable power. This was the words that he has used. I don't know whether that's a sign, because China is actually an enigma wrapped in a riddle, of sign of Xi Jinping himself indicating a slight change of posture of how it deals with the others in its foreign policy. But the fact remains, and we should take that into account, that as far as the situation in Ladakh is concerned, the Chinese have deployed. They're not only deployed, they're telling the whole world what they've deployed. They're showing it to us. It is no wonder that even our academics in our universities can now list out the Chinese equipment deployed in Ladakh, because the Chinese wants the world to know, wants India to know. That's their operating style. And of course, at the same time, you would know that the Chinese are going to build a big dam on the Along Sangpo, which is going to be a major issue for us. It is building villages all across the Sino-Indian border. And then it is using all its power, both ideological, economical, political, infrastructural, to actually win over the Tibetans. And in the process, of course, Buddhism is going to be a casualty, and they are just waiting for something to happen to the Dalai Lama before they create and let the cats amongst the pigeons in Tibetan Buddhism itself. So they've got it lined up. And what is actually China doing? China is on the prowl. Like all prowlers, it does by stealth. But it not only does by stealth, while it does by stealth, it's already sent us a message. And the message which it started off with, this whole process of showing strength, came with the conceptualization of the idea of comprehensive national power. It's got a Chinese origin. It therefore quantitatively measures power, and it is something which has now caught the attention of the strategic cognoscenti across the world, launched 1,000 PhDs, created a lot of departments, used as a matrix or index to compare power. And China obviously is very happy with that idea which it has sowed, because it's one of the messages which it uses to send to everybody, I am strong, I'm going to be stronger, now you guys better listen to us. And obviously the small guys and the middle guys are the ones who are now at the receiving end. But I think that this is part of a grand deception, because it has taken the idea of concept of comprehensive national power and hijacked it to give it a twist which does not exist. And that's especially in terms of military power. Military power is about relative power. CNP of China cannot come and fight in the mountains of Ladakh. That's not, CNP doesn't do the fighting. It is military forces which have to do the fighting or the threatening. China has got too many enemies, both on its eastern seaboard, in the Western Pacific, and of course, with India, it's made it its fences with Russia. But if you count the number of adversaries which it has, or the competitors it has, China is actually now going to be on the back foot, because I think it's overplayed its cards, and especially with the Biden administration coming. And if you see how he is fostering cooperation between NATO, none of all of that, there are a lot of imperfections there. EU, the Quad, and so on. China will be really worried, and I'm sure that this would influence Chinese behavior, because till now, China has managed to use its economic power to actually have its way along with a whole lot of countries. India actually is probably in that category where it has built the idea of giving us this thing of we are dependent on so many things. So we can't easily sort of get away from it, especially Southeast Asia, which is completely merged with the Chinese economy. And therefore, before they actually react to anything Chinese, they would be very careful. So Chinese economic power has been its main instrument of statecraft which it has used. It will continue to use it, and as Ambassador Rao said, BRI is a geopolitical project which actually is driven by Chinese economic power. But all projects, from its conceptualization to its execution, will have its problems. So the Chinese are going to actually now make sure that the fact that the COVID-19 has affected them probably the least, their ability to buy up and influence countries through economic power will get a further boost, because a lot of countries are now going to be indebted. And there is another story about how those indebted countries are going to pay back and how China is going to get in return. Abantota is a good example of it. But military power is about relative power. China is telling us that it's got 2 mechanized divisions opposite Ladakh. It's got so many airfields. It's got howitzers, it's got missiles, it's got the works. I mean, you see the list which Indian academicians themselves are advertising for China. It's amazing. It might be all true, and we should never underestimate the enemy. But what sort of war is China capable of fighting with us in the Himalayas? And that's a question which we need to answer. And that's a question which actually Indian military has already proved at least its mettle in this round. And the fact that we captured Kailash range, the very fact that given it back is a different story, it just goes to show that our ability to operate in high altitude cannot be downgraded because China's GDP and CNP is much before us. There, it is a different ball game altogether. And I think we need to make this difference. And I think our political leaders need to understand that China will threaten. China will tell us that they're going to do this, they're going to do that, but they won't, because they can't. If you just look at the calculations of the Chinese troops in Ladakh, and look at the infantry complement, and I have an infantry panelist also with me. If you want to, you can have tanks and so on. It's good. It's got a lot of photogenicity. It's got aircrafts have got photogenicity. Aircraft carriers have got photogenicity. You can fight people with it. But if you want to capture territory, then I'm afraid at the end of it, after your tanks move in and do whatever you want, you need infantrymen to hold the heights. And those heights are formidable. Those heights require infantrymen to hold it. Of course, they can throw a lot of firepower at us, but to hold ground, you need infantry. There is no other way to do it. So China has been using all its technological products, and it's a very impressive array. I'm not for a moment saying so, and we should not ever say, sure, I mean, think that it's less, it won't take up. That's not the point I'm making. But I'm trying to make the point of the psychological game that China is playing, because political power is actually a psychological relationship between those who exercised and upon whom it is exercised. To my mind, China learned drew its lessons from Doklam, the very fact that we had kept quiet about the occupation of Doklam after we had disengaged. Then we had Wuhan and we had Mamallapuram, and China, I think, read our mind. And China probably would have, I don't know, would have nearly got away with it if not of Galwan, where actually, if you remember the statement made by the Prime Minister, which is retracted later, but it's on YouTube even now, goes to show that they read our mind and probably thought that as long as India can declare victory, they can actually needle us. And I think that's one thing which we need to be careful about. So the point is, we are now in a psychological game. The Indian military and the Chinese military are deployed. It doesn't seem to show as to when we're going to disengage, de-escalate, whatever we want to call it. But the point at issue is that he will threaten us. He will probably pressurize us, because I think we need to understand how Ladakh and the northern border figures in the larger game, because it is the larger picture which we have to play to. India cannot play to the tactical games. The tactical logic cannot actually, which was built on to what do you call, wag the imagined military political dog in Ladakh, that they're going to actually link up with the cut off Siachen, link up with the CPEC. Those are good narratives for the Chinese to tell us. But anybody who knows about supplying an army across the Himalayas would probably take care, because they can come across, but to maintain themselves across the Himalayas would be practically a very difficult one. And why would the Chinese want to do it? They're not interested in the territory. This is not about territory at all of Ladakh. This is not about settling anything on the border. I mean, this is about using the border as a pressure point in the larger game. And that pressure point is about keeping India away from cooperation, especially in the maritime domain, in the larger struggle between China and the USA. That is the struggle. India is just in the way. There is no civilizational enmity here.
Sir, apologies. 2 minutes to wrap.
Okay, right. So there is no civilization enmity here. It is just about the fact that this is a geopolitical compulsion of the Chinese, that to keep India from cooperating with the others. But I think what China has achieved after Ladakh is just the opposite. But that doesn't mean that they will not continue to do so, because what it will do is keep up the pressure, get us and our COVID-hit economy to spend more of our scarce resources in the northern border, so that our maritime power plans will get affected. And that, I think, is a miscalculation which the Chinese are making, because one of the things India must tell them, or at least show them upfront, that you can do whatever you want on the northern border, but our progress towards becoming a maritime power and our progress towards cooperation in the maritime field will not be jeopardized, nor can you influence us. It is a matter of political will. This is a psychological relationship. This is not about some fighting which is taking place in the bleak heights of Ladakh. This is a larger game. So I will end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, General Menon. The military perspective is always very close to our hearts. Thank you very much. I fully agree with you that it's the infantryman that counts, and as a died infantryman, a former DG infantry, nothing would be better to my ears than that. Also, the Siachen thing, I agree with you totally. It's not feasible. It's not feasible in this day and age, to connect that. I think somewhere we're going very wrong in the narratives. So we have got the China's intent given by the two panelists. However, before I go to the questions, there are one too many, and we still have 45 minutes, so I think we'll be able to take on most of them. My question, of course, as a moderator, I take a little priority. My question to the two panelists is, how do we deter China's aggressive behavior? Because there is a China's aggressive behavior that I think is agreed upon. What all do we do to deter China's aggressive behavior? Ambassador, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, General. I'll be brief. When I survey the scenario, I'm constrained to say that the risk today is our getting completely immersed in our territorial land border problems with China, and tangentially also, of course, with Pakistan. Pakistan, of course, is the compound ghost here, always lurking, always on the radar. But when you look at our region, when you look at India's geography, it is concentrated on the centrality of sea power. Maritime reach overshadows continental power, as one of the Australians, Rory Metcalf, said recently. Sea power, it's sea power that gives us extraordinary flexibility. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. Today, you know, the territorial issue with China is occupying front and center, and it seems to consume us with a ferocity that perhaps is deflecting attention away from some other priorities, and also resources are being deflected, naturally so, because of the threat we face. How are we going to deal with China? Deterrence is obviously important. Improved logistics, intelligence, surveillance. It's going to be a long haul. Our army, our ground forces are very well prepared. They are very, well equipped to handle this threat from China. But, the nation does not fight only with its army. It has to fight in a comprehensive way. It has to fight on the basis of the resources it can deploy, the strength, inherent strengths that it possesses, and it's not just military strength that I refer to now. And it has to devolve and define a strategy based on a huge number of factors beyond the military. The other strategy, of course, is denial. Occupying the Kailash range, of course, was one, but we sort of gave it up in February when we achieved some degree of de-escalation in Pangong So, disengagement, you could call it. But in other areas, what are the tactical advantages we can gain? Have we thought of that? In Sundarongchu, in fact, for 9 years, we held those heights. And I know, as somebody who was dealing with the subject in the MAA when Sundarongchu happened, how much discomfiture it caused the Chinese, how much invective was hurled against us on the lines of what we heard during Doklam. Then the other thing is we have to focus inwards within our own national confines, the internal balancing that we need, and not just an obsession with the social factors in our national makeup, but on development as the hard truth. As Deng Xiaoping would famously say, development is the hard truth. Then our South Asia policy, as I also referred to briefly, needs redefinition and recalibration. I think it's been, a lot of responsibility lies with us. Why is South Asia in the place where it is today? Even if we have our problems with Pakistan, I think we have not set an example for integration and connectivity in the region as the biggest country. Our Indo-Pacific strategy needs careful formulation, laying out in detail. And look at Peninsular India. We are here. I mean, I'm speaking from Bangalore. General Menon is in Bangalore. We are in Peninsular India, and Peninsular India has to become an ocean economy. Our naval and maritime requirements to build a truly defining naval presence in the Indian Ocean should not be neglected. Looking at the relationship with China, we are now engaged in this kind of going round, merry-go-round kind of debate on how, the border should be front and central. China has to restore a status quo. Improvements of relations in other areas will have to take the back seat until then. How realistic is this policy? We have to think. Unless, of course, we are prepared, to have this sacrificial, self-sacrificing policy in the long run. Why can't we think in terms of what, like the United States Secretary of State said recently, that China policy has to be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must. Perhaps these are the three projections that we need to take very seriously in crafting an approach to China for the for the future, because it's not going to go away. Geography has put us in China's vicinity and China in our vicinity. And we have to come up, just being in the Quad is not going to solve our problems. Ultimately, we will have to face this challenge from China head on, and it has to be a multi-pronged strategy to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for saying that Quad is not the one-stop solution to everything. We'll have to face it ourselves. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, yes.
So let me just start from the ambassador's thing about, I think without resolving or let's say reforming our governance systems, I don't think we can actually do what we want to do, because it is not that we do not know what should be done. As usual, it is we can't get it done. That's actually been a problem. And governance systems are, I mean, the very fact that what we have done with vaccination itself is a reflection of what is happening to the acquisitions.
I think General Menon's got a bit of a freeze on his internet. General Bhatia, you want to pick up a question for Ambassador Menon?
Yes, I think till he gets his connectivity back. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, please carry on. Please carry on.
All right, I'll just switch off my video because I think that would be. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can
Please
hear
carry
you.
on. Yeah, we can hear you. Yes. Yes, sir, we can. Please carry on.
Okay. All right. Is that first thing is the issue of governance things which we have to resolve, but be that as it may, I think deterrence is a psychological relationship. We must understand that we must play to China's game. China is playing a game, and we are there not because China has got any historical enmities with us. We are there because, as I said, we come within the larger game of the struggle between two big powers, which is now China and USA. And I think we have to recognize that that is the game we have to play to. So whatever deterrence which we are talking about, and if it is military, I think we forget that we are nuclear powers. There is, if China is going to give us the big, and if they think that India is going to give them a walkover, I mean, how it will actually impact the impact of it on its larger, this thing in its Western Pacific with Taiwan and the rest of it will all be affected. So India has got that power to actually put those dreams to rest, and China would not even attempt to do it. At least one of the messages I'm sure from the present Ladakh crisis is that you can't push India, because the fact remains that we can stand our ground. And I think that would be something on which the deterrence would work. But that doesn't mean that they can't do other things. But they will continue to do it, and we must plan for it. And I'm sure when we talk about the fact that we're talking about deterrence as of now, it is about what you have. It is not about the plans that you're making, because those are different issues. Those are deterrence, which is going to be 10 years from now. When we actually advertise that we're going to have 24 submarines, those submarines are going to come into the waters quite a long time now. Talk about what do we do now? The point is, we've got to defend the North with our own wherewithal. We can expect certain amount of intelligence sharing and so on, surveillance help from our friends. But as far as the maritime domain is concerned, that is where the cooperation is there. So as long as we can connect China's aggressive actions in the North to our maritime spaces and tell them that we can connect, we don't have to do it. And there are a whole lot of vulnerable targets which are actually roaming around the Indian Ocean. We just have to put it into their head that the Indians will do it. Like we have to put it into their head that Indians will use air power to defend the northern borders if it is required. They should have no doubts about it. That is deterrence. And our ability to actually have the wherewithal, the technological capability is a matter of what we plan for. And I just want to have a word about technology. If If CNP and so on was a main index of how who will win and lose, I'm afraid history doesn't back it. The weaker guy has beaten the bigger guy in most of history for quite some time. And surely the Americans and the Russians in Afghanistan, the Vietnamese in Vietnam against the French and the Americans, and look at it anywhere. The fact is, we've got geography on our side as far as the northern border is concerned. We have to leverage that geography. And if technology is not available, then we have to fight without the fact that, with the fact that we are not able to match them in technology. Technology is not the main determinant finally of war. It is a determinant of battles, yes, but not of wars. Wars are a different thing altogether. That is why the Americans are going away from Afghanistan, because if that be the case, they are fighting the lowest level of technology with the Taliban, with the most powerful nation in the world. So let us not be carried away by what the Westerners are telling us, that they are the most, technology is the only thing. There is more to war and battle than technology is, I think, what we have to remind ourselves. And we must stop borrowing ideas easily from the West, because they are a technology-oriented society. We are not there as yet, and we can't afford it also. So we first must learn to fight with what we can afford. And that is where India's brain power comes, because it's a matter of how do you actually organize yourself. And that is the thing about military power. Military power is a reaction situation. It is not like a surgeon who's operating on a patient lying comatose. That is not how military power is. Battles are fought or wars are fought. So India has, and I'm sure that our military leadership should be able, they should at least plan for the fact that India's economy is not going to make available the type of economic wherewithal which they would demand. They will get promised. I mean, right now, the defense minister has told most of the ministries to cut down 20% of the budget, but that must be a passing phase. The fact remains that we must now cut our cloth to what we can afford. And that is not something, and we can continue to say, because the political leadership also has to take the call, that they need to prioritize security. They seem to be spending a whole lot of money like Air India and so on. But I think if they can just prioritize what they should, which is health, education, and security, they would do a good job. There's a case there also. So while, from my experience, I don't think the politicians are going to do anything like that, the military should be prepared to actually have their budgets cut. But that doesn't mean we cannot fight. And that, I think, is the most important thing to say. So deterrence is about telling them that we can hurt them. We don't have to hurt them equally if they try to hurt us. That capability, I think, we should have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And so deterrence and domination of the IOR would deter China's aggressive in the northern borders, definitely. We have a whole lot of questions. I'll request the panelists to be to answer this question. Some of them have already been answered, actually, because they were written, I think, before the panelists would complete their comments. The first question was, so I'll go as per the seniority of the timing of asking the questions. First question was Lieutenant Amitabh. He said that India-China relations are of global significance, but why is the global commitment of the Western Bloc weak to India's issues concerning China? India's border with China is of little significance to the main actors. What is the take of the panelists? And that this question for Ambassador Rao. Yours, ma'am.
Just unmuting myself. Well, as I said briefly in my earlier remarks, I don't think we can expect the Western powers or our friends, our partners, to pull our coals out of the fire as far as China is concerned. You know, this dispute that we have with China, everybody, dates it now to Galwan. But this is a legacy dispute that we have with China. It is over 60 years in terms of chronology and age that this dispute first arose. And we have failed to resolve it. Both countries, I think culpability rests with both countries. Even today, of course, words like betrayal, words like, a failure, words like being shortchanged by China. These are all part of the lexicon that we use when it comes to very subjectively looking at the whole range of our problems, the problems between India and China. People, I think, need to have more of a historical perspective about this problem. And, we may talk till kingdom come about the need to preserve peace and tranquility along the line of actual control. But this whole line of actual control, which is not a line of control, but a line of actual control, which exists in our minds, perhaps not so clearly on the ground, it has kept shifting, and it is all related to the conflicting territorial claims between India and China. And why is it that both our countries, civilization states, have not been able to come up with solutions? Of course, finger pointing is very easy. From both sides it goes on. Both sides have failed to exhibit the maturity and the tolerance and balance that is required to solve these problems. So I think ultimately, let's turn the searchlight on ourselves. Let's not wait for the Western countries to come up with a formula or come to India's defense. I don't think we need that. India is neither poor nor is it defenseless.
May I?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think I think we need to note the fact that as far as it suited China, they kept the border as quiet as possible. When they became strong, they are leveraging their strength, which they have built up over a period of time, to put pressure on India. So it is not about the border dispute. China will not solve that border dispute, not at this point in time, because it is a good leverage for them to use against India. Why would they want to solve the border dispute?
Right, sir. Before asking a question, there is a comment by Admiral Anish Chopra, I think. He said that if we have to cut a coat with a cloth presently given to us to tailor our maritime response, then aspiration have to give way. I think he's got a point out there, because our resources are limited, and we will, with the COVID situation, the armed forces especially will have to be asked and tasked to do more and more and less and less. So I think he does have a point out there on top of the military response. Coming to the next question is by Mr. Pratik Prasher. Sorry if I can get the rank wrong. What will it take to create multiple threats for China in multiple domains using alliances? So I think the question is more of binding to balance versus strategic autonomy. Ambassador Rao, please.
I think I've already answered this question when I spoke
Yes.
how we move forward. So I think I'll pass.
Right. Okay. Then we have. Would you like to comment on this is a very question on the ground, and the gentleman has requested to take it on. The desirability of pitching it at the very outset of the counter to the BRI. What do we do with the counter to the? So both panelists. What do we do with the counter to the BRI? Do we have a counter to the BRI? The BRI is China's dream, like you rightly said, Ambassador Rao. It's a China dream, and CP is central to it. So how do we go about seeking alternatives to the BRI, especially in the South Asian context?
Yeah, I think, General, what I said was that the BRI was the Indo-Pacific with Chinese characteristics, whatever that may imply. I was looking at the list of questions, and I noticed that Ambassador Saurabh Kumar had asked a question about the Build Back Better World B3W strategy that had been announced B7 summit. So maybe that is a kind of the alternative vision to BRI. Would India be a part of it? I don't think India has foreclosed the option of being a part of it. I think when one of our senior officials was asked, they said they're looking at the plan and then they will decide how to move forward on it. But as far as infrastructure needs for the region are concerned, I think, we have to take a cue in terms of how the Southeast Asians, we keep talking about ASEAN as being central to the Indo-Pacific, but nothing we're saying or doing on the Indo-Pacific and taking on China, especially where the Quad is concerned, is thinking of how ASEAN would react to this, because the ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, are going to be at the fulcrum, at the nucleus of any tensions that arise in the region, conflict that arises in the region, if, this classic Mahabharat between China and the US were to happen, which is how all competition is being structured today. As far as participating in such, whether it's the Blue Dot network or a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure or this B3W, I think India should keep its options open. Ultimately, I think, look at Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We are one of the biggest stakeholders there, and that is really a Chinese creation in many ways, a Chinese inspired sort of organization. So in terms of our autonomy, strategic autonomy, as we like to call it, I think India should keep its options open, but ultimately, the problem doesn't go away easily. I agree with General Menon. China is not going to solve the border problem with us, but I think it's time we took a close, hard look at all these issues that confront us and understand that, these are not going to go away so easily. Our friends and our partners are not going to come up with an abracadabra to solve all this. We have to strengthen ourselves internally. We have to move with deftness and dexterity when it comes to our external relationships, and ultimately face this problem that we have with China on the border, understanding that it is not going to go away overnight, that the train has already left the station in many ways. We are not going to see a border settlement in my lifetime, at least, in many of our lifetimes. And therefore, it will be a question of how to keep juggling with all these challenges in the air.
Thank you. And there's another question also, and it's very, should India adhere to that long-standing one China policy? No, we need to reset our China policy after what's happening in 2020. So do we adhere to our one China policy? And what are the pros and cons for this?
What dog do we have in the fight as far as that is concerned? I would put it that way. I mean, we have sympathies towards Taiwan. We obviously would not like China to swallow up Taiwan. We would not like to see a war in the Indo-Pacific erupt because of Taiwan. What are we going to do if that sort of conflict happens? Are we going to throw in our forces, our support behind the Americans or the Taiwanese? So that's not going to happen. So I think at this moment, I don't believe that question stares us in the face, that we have to redefine or somehow reconsider our one China policy. On that count, I think look at the whole issue of Tibet. We kind of gave away Tibet on a platter to China in 1951. Not that Tibet was ours at all, not at all. But what I'm saying is Tibet had some, by any legal, internationally legal definition, it did possess an autonomous status. It had enjoyed a degree, a very pronounced degree of independence from 1911 to 1951, and it was all thrown away. We decided to do that. And are we going to reconsider that? Obviously, these things are now not so easy to reconsider. So I think I think reconsidering a one China policy may not be politic at the moment, especially we have enough on our plate to deal with vis-a-vis China. This doesn't mean that this is a measure of our pusillanimity. No, not at all. It's not that, but it is a measure of our pragmatism.
Thank you. Just for the information of the participants, Ambassador Rao has written, publishing a book, Tell It on the Mountain, India, Tibet, China, 1949 to 1962. We look forward to the book. I'm sure this will cover the aspects of Tibet we're talking about. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, there's another question. There's an article which the General Menon published today, and it is a very direct one. So the question is based on that. Says the question, Ambassador Rao, though different General Menon article is quoted, is it don't annoy China policy. Can our foreign policy shift from differential and appeasing one towards China in a more realistic and effective one without being muscular? I think the question from Mr. Prohit.
Is that for me? I don't think.
Yes, it's.
Well, I wouldn't use the word appeasement. I don't think we have Chamberlains in our system. I don't believe we should use the word appeasement. I think we have had a fairly, what shall I, a policy of a management regime, let me call it, for our relationship with China over the years. We have stuck to our interests. We have not sacrificed our basic interests, our basic principles when it comes to dealing with China. Somehow in the public space, in the amphitheater, where a lot of things are discussed and debated in this country, I think, we always seemed, the predominant opinion is that India is surrendering on this or that when it comes to neighbors like China, or for that matter, with Pakistan. It's not so easy at that. The cookie doesn't crumble like that. I don't believe we've practiced appeasement towards China. And now after Galwan, I think we've made it very clear that we want to return to the status quo. We've stuck to our grounds. But I think policy should always be a mix of principles, that irreducible principles that we cannot sacrifice, and that space where we can afford to be flexible, where we can afford to be imaginative, where we can afford to be creative. That's the only way evolution happens. It happens that way.
General Bhatia, can I
Thank you.
ask one question on behalf of
Yeah,
General Murthy? I think that
please.
question was coming somewhere else to Mrs. Rao, where she mentioned about there being no strategic consensus in China. So how exactly can India exploit their internal differences to our advantage? For Mrs. Rao, Ambassador Rao.
When I said that there's no strategic consensus on how to deal with India, I believe that the voices that are preaching moderation, that are preaching, conciliation, that are preaching more flexibility, are being outvoiced by those that speak of assertiveness, speak of not sacrificing on territorial claims, that speak of not yielding an inch to India. That's where the lack of consensus lies. And I think, I hope that the better angels, as they say, are able to take precedence over the demons that exist. I think in the wider space, in what shall I say, in both countries, because the predominant tendency and the trend in most of the world today is to be very, very assertive, very nationalistic, very exclusivist in the definition of what very subjectively your interests should be. And when can better sense prevail? I mean, I know that I'm a voice in the wilderness when it comes to this, but I think at my age, I can afford to be that voice in the wilderness.
Thank you. There were a number of questions. Actually, the questions are one too many, and the time is a little less. And some of them already been answered in many ways. But this one, I think, has been answered, but needs a little more focus. What are the options for India, both in the short and long term, to protect its territorial integrity and promote national interest vis-a-vis China? And in the present scenario, is building or balancing or countervailing coalitions with other nations, basically bind to balance, which you have covered in any case, which support Indian international forums as well as modern weapons, platform technologies, the only solution to safeguard our territorial integrity. General Menon, sir, could you take on the first one?
Yeah, territorial integrity, maintaining it with the resources that you have, is actually the task of generalship. And that's actually a matter of detail. The fact is, I think we are quite capable of doing that. China can bite here and there, and that's that we know, because of the length of the border, the fact that our infrastructure doesn't match it. But we can also pay them back in maybe not to a certain extent, same extent, but we certainly can actually put them into an embarrassing position. And that, I think, would be sufficient for deterrence itself. So it is the main thing which we have to actually get over with about territorial integrity is about the problematic about how do we actually protect every inch of territory and yet be prepared to fight a war or a battle. There are two different things in that sense. So I think we now need to realize that we need to switch from what we were thinking before, when the border was actually quite benign, incidents were few, to a situation where we need to make sure that we are not policing, we are actually manning a border which is completely active. And one of the first things which we need to do is to convert the ITBP battalions on the model of the Rashtriya Rifles and put it under command of the armed forces. I think That itself will provide a lot of relief. It is an outdated notion that you need police forces to guard the Sino-Indian border. It is a Home Ministry which has continued to hold on to that notion. But I think it's, at least now, let us not delay this, because what it will give us is tremendous amount of resources, and what infantrymen understand, it will be mostly infantry resources. We can easily offload the ITBP manpower to the vacancies which are there already there, and we can straight away make this into the same model. We have the model is very right. We just have to fit it into the Sino-Indian border model. And so that would actually, to expect that we will get all the technological gizmos on which we got to fight will take time. So our tactics, our doctrine must now move away from what we think is the high-tech war which China is going to fight, to actually get to this thing how low-tech people who's this technological gap can still fight the high-tech guy and win. That is the challenge of Indian military leadership. And I think if we can do that, we'll keep our borders safe.
I think you answered
thank you, sir.
even the question of General Anil Ahuja and R.R. Chaudhary. They also had the same question.
Gentlemen, you just spoken about it, the ITBP and what we're doing. Having been at the NSCS for long years, is it time to have a, the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Home Affairs, and they're conflicting directions and orders being passed. We all been, at the receiving end. Is it time to have a Ministry of Security, which looks at the complete comprehensive national security as such, instead of having a Ministry of Defense and then Ministry of Home Affairs, the border management, the internal security? There are conflicts out there.
See, I don't think India can actually differentiate, merge the two, because although they are connected, and because internal security is far too complex, too political in terms of how it is managed, it is better left to the Home Ministry to bear that burden. Do not burden the external threat with internal security is a fundamental line which we need. Actually, the problem now is the MOD has also got, despite the CCS decision that, internal security should be taken care of by CRPF, the defense forces continue to be actually engaged. So I don't think that sort of, it's a revolutionary thought, but I don't think we should actually want to bring the umbrella of security under one. Internal security and external security, I think they have, it's not that they can be completely different. That's a matter of coordination, and let it be like that. I do not subscribe to the idea that we should have it as under one umbrella.
Thank you, sir. Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm just asking this question, which possibly Manjul Saxena has asked, and it goes back to what Ambassador Rao said. I heard her fantastic conversation with Rory Metcalf of ASPI the other day. It's more about the Australia-India engagement, considering what's happening in Galwan. It's many signals are being sent, like General Menon said. It's quite possible, going back to what General Shankar had written, that what's happening on the East is more a reflection of India's policy on the West, of the statements that India said about taking back POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. So while that's all happening up there in the Himalayan ranges, is there potential for Australia and India to combine their maritime forces and work towards putting more pressure on China? Because both are at the receiving end. India is having the kinetic scene up there in the Himalayas. Australia is having a massive economic pushback. So maybe Ambassador Rao first and then General Menon, please.
Thank you. Somebody compared Australia to the canary in the coal mine, when it came to seeing the threat from China and, calling out China. The collapse of Australia's relationship with China happened gradually and immediately, as Hemingway would put it. Once, this whole network of Chinese interests in Australia had been exposed. Looking forward, I think when it comes to Australia and India collaborating, just as Australia and Japan are collaborating so closely today, I think Japan is the cementing factor, I think, in this relationship between Australia, Japan, and India. And I think we should look in that direction to see how we can network, a coalition of shared interests between the three of us. Even, as I said, you can trilateralize interests within the Quad, just as you can bilateralize them also. So we should be open to the options of various patterns of cooperation emerging on these counts. Ultimately, I think all of us are intent that China's ambitions, we need a settling point for those ambitions. They cannot just be allowed to grow untrammeled. And it's just with the growth in the relative power vis-a-vis China of countries like India, countries like Japan, Vietnam, Australia, that is going to create that balancing tendency that we need in this region to be able to hedge against China. So that is the caucus, the coalition of interests, together with alignment towards the ASEAN outlook, rule-based order, respect for sovereignty. All this, I think, needs to be done within the region, and neither China nor the United States, as has been said, can possess our futures. They cannot possess our futures. We have to take possession of our futures. Ultimately, over the next few years, it cannot be, that thought cannot be avoided. The assessment cannot be avoided that China's internal challenges will multiply. China's growth is going to slow down. Its population is going to age. So, right now it believes in its own propaganda, China, for an image that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, provides for them. We don't have to be too mesmerized or taken in by that, or follow any line that suggests that we are overwhelmed by that. Ultimately, I think our destiny, India's destiny, is to be a leading power in the Indian Ocean. As I said, that is dictated by the geography of our long peninsular coastline, our island territories, as in the Andaman Islands, Lakshadweep, for instance. So let's look at how we can realize that vision and create, a strategy that buttresses our interests to become that leading power in the Indian Ocean.
General Menon, you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing which probably, I think one of the things that we need to do, and that is to do with the fact that the Andaman Nicobar actually is the greatest geographic gift in this whole game. And we need to leverage this as much as we can with whatever resources that we have. And maybe the first starting point we make is give the Andaman Nicobar command back to the Navy. And I think that would be a good idea to start with.
General Bhatia, one last question and then we wrap up. I'll leave it to you. But I think it's a question, it's an excellent suggestion by L.V. Krishnan. I'll read out what he says. The relationship with South Asian neighbors is important. How can the relationship be made stronger? The people on both sides know little about each other. Can we cultivate it by introducing studies in several of our universities on the language, culture, history and traditions with each of them? What stops us doing it? Now, what stops doing is, I think, is well known. I have a suggestion for the convener and the members of the CASA. With the rich experience of the participants and the members of CASA, could we start this and then see where it goes? It's just a suggestion. I'm picking up from what's been suggested out here. It's a suggestion and we can carry it forward. The only question I have is, which is, there's a game of balance of power which is going on between China, the US, and the European Union, and the others in this thing. India as a leading player, do we really get involved in the balance of power game, or should we have a balance of interests as our focus? Or we have a balance between the balance of power and balance of interests. My question, of course, the last one goes to Mr. Rao.
Thank you. I don't believe we should be playing power games, but we should definitely be in the game of protecting our interests, because interests can never be sacrificed. Interests need to be protected. Interests need to be advanced. I think that is probably the best way forward. And when it comes to a question about South Asia, I think in India, we need to get out of that India-centric approach when it comes to South Asia. As I said, we need to think of South Asia as an integer, not as an arena, but as a region. And that should be our approach. It can't be that, as the Hindu newspaper had an editorial on this last year. It said South Asia cannot be the centralized Jambu Dweepa. It can't be the mega state of the nationalist imagination in India. Ideal South Asian regionalism is about devolution, it's about federalism, it's about strengthening local democracy, and the sabotaging of SAARC, which lots of people here consider a victory. It's a very feather-light geopolitical strategy, in my view. It fails to consider that regionalism, integration, connectivity can bring potent growth to our peripheral regions. And when we talk of peripheral regions, we are talking city.
Thank you. General Manager, final comments.
I think all I want to say is that from what has happened till now, I hope the Indian political and the strategic community will jettison our idea of what China is about, what China, and not China, China's Communist Party is about, and what they are trying to do in the globe and how we are getting affected. So we will no longer be deceived as we have often been in our history. And I think it's time that we revise and hold, and I would agree that we are neighbors, we should be competitors, we can be adversaries sometimes, but it's not the fact that we want to see their demise, neither should they be seeing our demise. So from that point of view, I think we need to look at China differently from what we have so far shown what we have done. If you look at 2014, I was there at the Rashtrapati Bhavan when the Tibetan leader was actually part of the swearing-in ceremony of the Prime Minister. And then we had a whole lot of about turns which went along. We don't seem to learn our lessons, and I hope now that will cease.
Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting. The panelists have really, got our minds thinking. Not that we're not thinking earlier, but so many thoughts have come in, and the fact that we have had so many questions which went unanswered, I do feel that CASA could think of having one more session on some of these questions, because these questions really are, they need to be answered and they need to be discussed. There are no answers actually. They need to be discussed, and we need to find optimal solutions to all these things. I thank the two panelists, and I also thank all the participants. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Team CASA for organizing this. Over to you, General Gautam and Mrs. Martin Chan.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Team CASA, I thank Mrs. Nirupama Menon Rao, General Prakash Menon, you, Sir, General Bhatia, the core group of CASA, especially Mr. Mahadevan Shankar, Mr. Irfan Malik, and Ms. Barnali Singha Roy, our technical team, all the members of CASA, and above all, the audience of today's webinar. We've had a fascinating discussion and some very excellent questions and answers. As General Bhatia said, regrettably, we could not take on all, and we will look for probably another webinar because China is active. The subject itself is so dynamic that we will surely be having a webinar shortly on this. Today, we had crossed the maximum number of 100 attendees, and I'm told from July onwards, Zoom is going to give us the attendees up to 500. But nevertheless, our technical team was sharing the webinar live, and for those who have missed out, a recording of the webinar will be uploaded onto the CASA website today. Today, 15th of June, the Galwan Commemoration Day. I think it's a good idea if we visit the subject on this very day next year and take stock of the situation as would be obtaining then. We can compare the discussion we had today to the discussion that we'll be having 1 year hence, and we will see where we have reached. In the end, thank you all very much for your interest and your patience. It's been a wonderful webinar today. On behalf of CASA, once again, I thank you all. Good night and Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Thank you so very much, and Jai Hind.